like many other games and movies, one of the most discussed and disputed aspects of The Last of Us is its ending. But not because it was bad, abrupt, or unfitting in any way, rather because it's so hard to actually take a side and deduce what really was going on with certain characters' motivations. Hey stragglers and tourists, my name is TheiPadCat, and in today's video we're going back to The Last of Us Part 1 to discuss its ending. But not in its entirety. Plenty of other people have already done that a long time ago. Maybe I'll do it too in a future video. But no, today, if the title wasn't a giveaway enough, we're going to dive into what Ellie really wanted. Did she want to sacrifice herself for the cure, or did she want to live? So without further ado,
let's get on with it.
Okay, so let's first start with the fact that we don't know the answer to this question. If you were expecting that, I'm sorry. But I think that's a good thing. It's very much by design on Naughty Dog's part. Some of you may be confused with this video, and think something along the lines of, well, she clearly wanted to sacrifice herself, just look at X conversation, or she clearly wanted to live, just listen to what she says in X scene. And that just shows that they succeeded with that. The fact that Ellie never says outright what she would have wanted and leaves us with vague allusions to what she thinks makes the ending very much up in the air. It's a big part of why it's so hard to take sides. If Ellie had clearly stated that she wanted to live or sacrifice herself for the cure, it would have been so much easier to take a side. If she wanted to live, well, then Joel just saved her from the evil fireflies who tried to kill her. And if she wanted to sacrifice herself, well, then Joel just ruined the chances of a world-saving vaccine being created, as well as going against Ellie's personal wishes. Of course, you could also say that the reason we don't hear Ellie's opinion on the whole thing is that she didn't know what actually went down at the hospital, and thus didn't know she'd actually have to die for the vaccine. And I guess, from a certain point of view, that'd be correct. But it's been implied in several interviews in the years since Part 1's launch that she saw through Joel's lie at the end of the game, and at least partly figured out what happened, but that she in that moment on the hill outside Jackson just chose to accept it. Anyways, let's move on to talking about what argues in favor of and against Ellie wanting to sacrifice herself, starting with the prior. The ending of The Last of Us ultimately boils down to a clash between Joel and Marlene's views on Ellie's fate. Marlene lives for her cause, and despite having known Ellie for countless years, is convinced the only way forward is killing her for the cure to CBI. Joel, on the other hand, cannot stand losing another daughter, and the only person left in the world he cares for, and thus doesn't care about whatever cause or greater good her death would help. Their exact ideas or motivations don't really matter, but what does is that they are opposite of each other when it comes to Ellie's fate. It's important because, during their final confrontation in the parking garage of the Firefly Hospital, there's a very interesting exchange that may indicate that Ellie would have wanted to sacrifice herself.
It ain't for you to decide.
It's what she'd want. And you know it.
Now, as you just saw when Marlene tells Joel that this is what she'd want, he doesn't say anything, to which she immediately catches on to and says that he knows it's true. Now, I don't know about you, but I definitely think that he had a moment of consideration there. Not about potentially giving Ellie back and letting her die, but actually realizing Marlene is right, despite his will to save her. Of course, you could also argue that this was because he was about to shoot her, which, even though we don't see until a minute or so later, happens right after this scene. But on the other hand, when has Joel ever hesitated to use any means necessary to get what he wants and needs? I really do think he paused because he realized that there was something to what Marlene said, especially considering how he nervously breathes out after shooting her. His "I'll do whatever it takes" ideal and facade fell, only for a second, since he goes right back to ruthless Joel when he kills Marlene moments later, but for a second nonetheless, since he realized how this really was what Ellie wanted. Moving on, we have two other instances where we get some indication that Ellie would have wanted to sacrifice herself. The first being right after the giraffe scene when Joel and Ellie look out over the deteriorating skyline of Salt Lake City. Having fears of losing her, Joel tells Ellie that they don't have to do it, and that they can just go back to Jackson and be done with it. To which Ellie responds with the famous line,
After all we've been through. Everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.
Now, at this point, neither of them knew that she'd have to give up her life for the cure. The fact that Ellie tells Joel that they can go wherever he wants after they're done with the Fireflies implies that she wasn't expecting to have to sacrifice herself, and maybe that she wouldn't want to either. But on the other hand, her determination to not have everything from losing Riley to getting to Salt Lake City alive be for nothing could also be interpreted as her being ready to pay that price. The second one, which points even more to her being willing to sacrifice herself, is the very final scene of the game, where she makes Joel swear that everything he said about the Fireflies is true. It relates back to the Salt Lake City scene, and how she wants to make sure the trauma she's been through not being for nothing. She makes him swear to ease her survivor's guilt, even though she might not believe it. Why does she deserve to be there when so many others didn't make it? Especially since she might have been what could have saved her friends like Riley and Sam from dying. There's a reason she interrupts Joel in frustration when he tries to force his "you just keep moving" mindset on her. She essentially wants him to justify her survival by making him swear. And that to me definitely feels like she was ready to die for the vaccine. On the other hand, you could flip all of what I just went through on its head, as well as go through some additional things and say that Ellie actually wanted to live. Which is exactly what we're going to do now, starting with that parking garage scene. Now, as I said, and as we all know, Marlene lives for her cause and only her cause, which is kind of expected and required if you're going to be the figurehead for a nationwide organization as huge as the Fireflies. Don't you think she would say absolutely anything and put on whatever act she could to get Ellie back and not have the goal she's been working toward for the past 20 years be pulled away the last second? And how does she know what Ellie wants? She hasn't seen Ellie for almost a year, and even prior to that, it's implied that they hardly had the closest relationship. I'd say Joel knows better than anyone what Ellie wants, even though that's hardly his reason for saving her. The scene at the Salt Lake City overlook could just as well be interpreted as Ellie wanting to live. It's not weird that she'd want it all to be for something, but that doesn't have to mean that she'd be willing to die for it. The fact that she tells Joel that they can go and do whatever he wants as soon as it's done could also imply that she was expecting to survive and live on to do other things, than force herself through the hell they just went through to get to the Fireflies. Which is further reinforced by the fact that she seems rather enthusiastic about Joel teaching her how to swim, and well, I guess also how to play the guitar when they leave Salt Lake City. When it comes to the ending scene, you could also interpret her survivor's guilt and forcing Joel to swear that everything he said about the Fireflies was true, was because she wanted to live. But that need for all of her friends dying and trauma not being for nothing, as well as her needing justification for her to still be there, were in the way of her being able to move on properly. Thus, she asks Joel to swear on it. Furthermore, there is another conversation in the science building of the university where Ellie asks Joel how he thinks the Fireflies will get the cure from her, and if he thinks it'll hurt. To which Joel responds reassuringly that it'll probably just be some blood samples, and then it'll be over.
How will they do it?
Do what?
Get the cure from me? You think it'll hurt?
No, it'll probably just draw some blood. It don't hurt.
I've gotten shots before. They vaccinated us at school. It sucked.
Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like Ellie was at least slightly worried about what was going to happen. I mean, if getting vaccinated, quote-unquote, sucked, and she's worried if it'll hurt, how in the world could she be prepared to die for it if she cringes at the thought of drawing some blood? It's hard drawing a conclusion one way or the other, and that's the way it should be. That way, everyone can have their own interpretation and/or headcanon of the events. Personally, I'm really torn. On the one hand, I'd like to believe Ellie wants to live. I mean, she's just 14. She has so much to live for. But on the other hand, self-sacrifice is hardly something new or unheard of. And having been through all the shit she has, I don't think it's all that weird if she'd be prepared to die either. That being said, will we ever get to know the answer to this? I'm not so sure. One would think yes, since, well, part 2 is a thing. And Neil explicitly said that having a sequel means they have to revisit that ending. As well as the fact that we know from the Outbreak Day week that Joel and Ellie aren't on the best of terms, both because of general teenager to parent stuff, but also because of past events. And I think we can all agree on what those past events are. But does that mean we'll get to hear what Ellie actually wanted back then? Maybe. But Naughty Dog have said multiple times that they won't tell you who is right and wrong, and that they really want to have that up in the air feeling about the story, so that the player can draw their own conclusions. And as I said in the beginning, us getting to know what Ellie wanted would undermine that and make it way more black and white. I can't say what they'll end up doing, but I'm leaning towards, and I'm hoping, that it's never revealed what Ellie actually wanted. But that's just what I think. What do you think? Do you agree with my points? Disagree? Do you think Ellie wanted to sacrifice herself, or do you think she wanted to live? Tell me in the comments down below, and let's talk about it. And after that, why not continue the discussion on my Discord server, which is where I got the idea for this video in the first place. And until next time, have a great day.